My name is Theresa Knutsen. I am a graduate of WSU, which entitles me to call myself a horticulturist. Technically, my specialties were greenhouse management and floral design, which does not exactly qualify me for this particular topic. But I've been working at Raintree Nursery now for 25 years, and I started my first 10, 12 years, something like that, with the nursery. What I did was answer customers' questions and help them and so forth. And that has proven to be terrific training. And then I just brought in my understanding of horticulture to go along with that. So we're going to talk about backyard fruit and berry growing for the beginner, getting started. And let me just go ahead and move on to, so here's my first question. And maybe we can have a show of hands. How many of you already have fruit trees and berry plants in your landscape?
Folks, if you go to the bottom of the page, there's a thing that says reactions, and you can do a thumbs up or a handshake or something to let her know.
Where it says,
there you go.
When I tried to log,
okay, and I'm not seeing any of the reactions.
you have about 5 or 6 people.
Theresa, one more thing. Click on participants at the bottom of your black screen if you have it.
Yes. Just click on it one time.
Just one time, and now you'll see the reactions.
Hang on a sec here. Let me try that one more time.
I would say just move forward with the presentation. So
yeah, you're sorry. Yeah, you're out here. Because it's just showing me a little box, and it's not very.
Can I be heard? Yes,
all right.
You can be heard.
Okay. When I try to log on the computer, it tells me I'm not authorized. Is there a trick?
Yes, you need to log on to your Zoom account first, and then try to get on here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Theresa, go.
All righty. All right. So not very many of you have fruit trees and berry plants, and so this is a good topic for us to be talking about then. So my next question, and Alice, this is where you can help me. I'm going to ask you folks to just use your little chat option there and give me some feedback as to why you want to grow your own fruits and berries. What is your motivation right now?
Type it in the chat. There's a little chat bar at the bottom there, a little chat icon, and type in why you want to grow fruit. To eat fresh fruit.
Love it.
For the satisfaction of eating it.
Yeah, okay.
Homegrown has the best flavor and a lot less expensive. To have fresh fruit and be successful at growing.
Mm-hmm.
Save money.
Yep.
And that looks about all for now. Oh, preserving, feed the grandkids. Just bought 12 acres and want to make it a nice hobby farm. Organic. Okay. Okay, there you go.
Oh, you guys are doing a great job. And so here's the list that I usually hear. Fruit tastes better homegrown. And it's not only because it's homegrown, but it's also because you can select varieties that taste great. Healthier, you can grow them organically, grow them for the children, or to remember your grandparents, something that they grew. And then all of that processing, less expensive than buying. I am curious how your interest has changed in the last year. If this last year has been any part of a motivator, and maybe you can let Alice know and she can follow up with me. But I'm going to move on quickly. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the unique aspects of our Pacific Northwest climate. Our climate is unique relative to most of the rest of the United States. This is really pretty important. So we can talk about a rainy season and a dry season. We have a rainy season that typically starts, some years it's going to start maybe in October. Some years it waits until December. We can almost count on the rainy season ending right around the 4th of July. I have attended many, many wet 4th of Julys over the years. And then typically following that, we dry out. That's great. Now we've got a growing season. And then we'll have a dry season. We have an unusually dry period with zero precipitation or nominal. That doesn't really count as precipitation for at least 6 weeks through the summer. Sometimes it'll go 10 weeks, maybe even longer. And that is unusual relative to the rest of the country, unless we're talking about the desert areas. We also can think about our transition from winter to spring. And the seasons simply play games. It goes back and forth between winter and spring for a couple of months. Finally, we might say, oh, maybe around the 4th of July, oh, I think, yeah, now it might be summer. And sometimes we're even not sure then. Transition from winter to spring, from season to season are not smooth. If you think about places like the upper Midwest, they will probably have about a week or two transition from one season to another. There are many places in the rest of the country that transition is very noticeable and concrete. Another really interesting thing about living in the Pacific Northwest is microclimate variation from one location to another. Ellis and I were talking about this the other day. Where I live, my elevation is just shy of 900 feet. And my growing season relative to the Chehalis Valley, which is at about 250-foot elevation, 15 miles as the crow flies from me, their growing season is 4 weeks longer than mine. It's not just a function of the elevation change. I can go on over to Raintree Nursery, another 15 miles as the crow flies. Elevation changes by 100 feet, and still there are differences between my location and at work. My sister-in-law lives on the other side of the field. She always gets frost before me and has an additional frost after I do, because she lives down in a hole in the geography. So that poses a lot of interesting challenges for us. My next thought is about chill hours. And, generally we don't have to think about chill hours in the Pacific Northwest. Chill hours are accumulated time measured when temperatures are between approximately 32 and 40 to, say, 45 degrees. And when you think about the Pacific Northwest, you will probably quickly realize, oh, we accumulate a lot of chill hours in the Pacific Northwest. We spend a lot of time between 32 and 45 degrees through the winter, and that's very, very true. We can accumulate between, depending on where you are, north and south through the state of Washington, probably anywhere from 2,500 to 3,500 chill hours annually. Why does that matter? There are certain plants that we want to pay attention to that, well, chill hours, the job of chill hours accumulating in the plants is to regulate when the plants are going to wake up in the spring. This is relevant with temperate zoned plants that have to go through a dormant cycle because it gets cold and it's just not warm enough to be growing. And the plants need some way to measure to know that it's time to start waking up again. And a lot of the plants we're growing here in the Pacific Northwest evolved in locations that don't have those high chill hours. And so they may be ready to wake up before our winter is actually complete or our spring is far enough into the spring, because the chill hours are met. All they need is that little warm push to start waking up. And that warm spell we get in January or the one we get in February might be just enough to wake that plant up. We also want to think about the growing degree days. Here we're measuring temperatures that range between 50 and about 80 degrees or so, and these are the temperatures that support active growth in the plants and fruit ripening and so forth. And relative to a lot of the rest of the country, we don't get a lot of growing degree day hours. And that's important. It relates to whether a particular fruit can ripen for you. And that's even though our growing season length may be long, because we don't necessarily have those really extra warm days. Now, you folks down there further south from me probably have warmer summers than I do. So ultimately, why does this all matter? That really, really long rainy season that kind of ticks along in the 40 to 50 degrees is highly supportive of fungal diseases. So we have a plethora of choices to choose from that our plants are going to be susceptible to. If we know which diseases to expect, we can select for resistance to those varieties, or we can plan a treatment program so that we don't have to have a lot of impact on our trees. That transition from winter to spring and back and forth, and waking a plant up before it's really time for it to be waking up, and then we get a cold snap following that warm spell, and those buds have started to swell, and they get freeze damage in them, and now they're going to be open to infection from bacterial canker or brown rot or some other fungal disease. So that transition is contributing to the potential for fungal diseases. That long, hot, dry summer that we experience guarantees that at least in the first year or two after you plant your trees, you will need to provide water for them. You will not be able to count on rainfall. So I'm going to go through this stuff fairly quickly so I can get to the fun the stuff where I do the demos. We've thought about the big picture. Now let's think about the smaller picture, so to speak, looking in your backyard. You want to think about sun exposure. Fruiting plants require a minimum number of hours of direct sun measured in June and July, late June into July, that minimum number of hours to initiate flower buds for the following year. If they don't initiate the flower buds, you don't get fruit. So this is very, very important. The majority of the fruiting plants want a minimum of 8 hours of direct sun measured in that time frame of late June and into July. Measure this, think about this in terms of the leaf canopy or the upper portion of the tree. You don't have to think about it at the ground level necessarily. So if you are really working on that niche location that doesn't have as much sun, think about where the canopy is going to be. Think about the length of your growing season so that you know whether you can ripen that fruit or not. And then temperature extremes, summer and winter. There may be extremes and there may not. Think about the kinds of space that you have. Large spaces, which allow you to put in a large spreading apple tree. Maybe you have smaller spaces that are going to accommodate berries, bushes a little bit better. Maybe you have some kind of odd shaped spaces, like a long, narrow location that you can put in something that has a narrow upright growth habit. There are columnar apples that would fit in a place like that. So explore what you have available that is in a location that has the sun exposure so you'll get your fruit set. We also want to keep an eye on what's happening in the soil. This is so important. We want to think about soil structure, the composition, how much sand, silt, and clay we might have. The proportions of those that makes up the soil structure. I don't know the story in your location. Alice, you can maybe provide me a little bit of feedback here, but I know in my location, there's a lot of heavy clay. Other places are going to have more of a silty loam, perhaps. Clay. A lot of clay. All right. And that has its challenges. There's an advantage to this clay. Up until the really hot summers of several years ago, my mature established plants, I never had to water them because that clay held sufficient water through the dry season until we got to this really extreme. But it does have an impact on what you can expect from how your root systems will perform. We want to think about drainage. This is really important. And folks, there's a little bit of confusion sometimes when we think about drainage. We don't really care a whole lot about how well water flows across the surface. Really want to think more in terms of how well water moves down into the soil profile, because that's how it's going to get to the root systems. And most of the plants that we're offering, and probably that you would even buy as ornamentals, are going to say prefers a well-drained soil. Slope doesn't do that. It has to be what's happening within the soil profile, how loose the soil is that allows water through. That drainage potential also encourages air to move down into the soil profile, which helps the soil be a lot healthier. I like to consider weeds as well, because sometimes those weeds are really good indicators of what's going on with my soil. If I see, well, of course, when I look out in my yard, I see a lot of dandelions. Those dandelions are telling me that the soil is very tight and has very poor drainage to it. If I see a lot of moss on the surface, I might be checking pH. The pH might be rather high. That might be a location where water remains in the soil and is very persistent, or it might be a very shady location. So there are interesting books available out there that you can find that will help you to understand what weeds might be telling you about your soil situation. We do want to have good soil fertility and an appropriate pH. The majority of the fruit plants we offer prefer a soil pH in the range of 6.3 to 6.8. There are some exceptions. We have some acid-loving plants like a rhododendron, but in terms of the fruiting plants, we're talking about blueberries and lingonberries and cranberries. There are also some of these plants that we offer that prefer a high soil pH. Something like a fig tree actually prefers a soil pH closer to 7. If we have a stone fruit on a peach rootstock, that rootstock is going to function better in a soil pH of 6.8 to 7.2 or so. Goji berry, people want to grow goji berry, and that is another one that wants that high pH, 7 to 7.2. So knowing your soil pH will be very important. And you want to make sure you have access to water for irrigation and a delivery system for it. I would suggest drip is very efficient. If you're only going to water for the first couple of years, a bucket can work. A little bit more effort, but you can even use a bucket. And here's another thing to just really be aware of, as I kind of indicated earlier when I was thinking about weather. If you have a pretty good idea of the typical sorts of disease and insect issues you might encounter in your location, that can inform your decisions that you make in terms of fruiting plants. Either you're going to select for resistance, and within relative to fungal diseases, we often can find some resistance or immunity, which means you don't have to have any sort of a spray program to manage. Or you can have a plan so that when and if those things show up, you know what to do, and you can even perhaps do a preventive spray program. So I just listed a few of them: scab, powdery mildew, Corynnean blight. Bacterial disease is really, honestly, bacterial canker and Pseudomonas disease are the same disease-causing organism. We've just applied two different names. When we're calling it bacterial canker, we're talking about stone fruits, cherries and peaches and plums and so forth. When we're talking about Pseudomonas disease, we're talking about pears, Asian and European. Same causal disease organism. And we have some lovely options in terms of insects. There have been some, the newer insects showing up, and I trust me, your extension service folks will be on top of those sorts of things and be able to provide you some advice. And in fact, I recommend, if you're not sure what the particular fungal issues are in your neighborhood that you should be aware of, contact your extension service. They're local. They've got their thumbs on this. And they will provide you with the information that you need to manage. They can even provide you with organic measures for managing these things. Now I've got a toolbar in my way. Okay, so I include the concept of other when I'm thinking about disease and insect issues. So I think about deer, rabbits, mice, raccoons, squirrels, cats, dogs. String trimmers are very hard on fruit trees. They can ring a tree and kill it in no time at all. Running children or children on bikes, lawnmowers. I lost something one year because my husband couldn't see it in the grass, and then it was gone. Come here, cursor. All right. So that was my kind of zip through, and I apologize for it. That was too fast. Alice, I do have that written document that I will send to you afterwards, and you can share it with folks, and it reviews what I just went through. So now that you know what you are starting with, or you have an idea what you're starting with, what else do you need to know to make a choice? Because this is really about how do I make a choice when we're getting started. I learned how to do a snapshot, and here is an image of the Raintree Nursery website, and we have a product now we're calling Growing Guides. And when you go to the Growing Guides, you can select different information on growing a variety of things, apples, berries, and so forth. And I'm just going to go to the apple section, and we're going to talk about pollination. Many of the fruit, well, you don't get fruit without pollination. Many of the fruits that we offer or that you can find require a different variety of fruit to accomplish the pollination. Some are self-fertile, which means no other fruit trees are required. Others are going to require a different variety. And it does need to be of the same kind of fruit. So if we're talking apples, you will always need another kind of apple or crab apple as the pollinizers. If we're talking pears or plums, then you need to stay within each of those groups. I start with apple pollination because it's perhaps a bit more complicated than some of the other fruits. In the Pacific Northwest, a really good rule of thumb is that apples require a pollinizer. They are not going to be self-fertile. You may find, if you're out exploring and find a company that's based in a place like California, or there are a few other places around the country, where they will say, this variety is self-fertile, that variety is self-fertile. In their locations, that is going to be reliably true. In our location, it's not. And, excuse me, it's not because we live in this wonderful place where it rains all spring and it's cool. So during the blossom period for the fruit trees, the cool temperatures changes the progression of going from 25% bloom to 50% bloom to 75%, and the overlaps just don't happen as reliably within the context of the individual tree. And it just, you can still get some fruit on an isolated tree, but you will not get near the quantity that you would if you had that pollinizer available. But wait, there's more. Now we're going to talk about a triploid apple, which means that the pollen, the DNA in the pollen is a triple strand of DNA and not a diploid like most of the apples. And that essentially makes that pollen sterile. It will not pollinize other tree fruit varieties. So although that tree pretends to be sending out pollen, it is not actually helping to pollinize anything else. But it will need pollination to set its own fruit. So if you are selecting a variety that is a triploid, you will need to select 2 other apple varieties to ensure you have pollination going all the way around. And there are some really great apples that are triploids, unfortunately. There has been one variety of apple tested that is reliably self-fertile in the Pacific Northwest, and that is the Queen Cox. The Queen Cox is one of the Cox's orange pippin type apples. It's a beautiful tree. Shapes itself so nicely as it grows. The branches kind of lay out nicely. It forms a really nice tree shape, easy to manage. And the fruit is fairly sweet, but also has good acids in it and a lot of complexity in the flavor. Great kind of variety to eat. But when you look at the pollination chart, you can see here a number of varieties written in red, like the Gravenstein, an old favorite for making applesauce and pies and so forth. Ashmead's Kernel, this is a russeted apple that if you add it to a cider, adds a really smooth texture and it's a very sweet, nutty sort of a flavor. The red Boskop has excellent storage capabilities. It's an excellent all-around apple for fresh eating, cider making, pies. But as you see, I'm pointing out all these terrific apples, but they are not. They do not provide a viable pollen. Another aspect of apple pollination is that some of them have the flowers very early. Some of them have the flowers much later in the season. Apples are extremely variable. That's why we have so many varieties and shapes of trees and so forth. So a variety in the very early group, such as the Alchemine, will only pollinize with another variety in the same season or in an adjacent season. So if I'm choosing Alchemine to pollinize, I can choose something within the same early season group, or I need to go over to the early mid-season group. Oh, my cursor ran away again. If I am choosing something from the late season, and then again, it's only going to work with the late season group or a mid-late season group. And that is just, that's just really important to know when you're selecting your varieties, because the next fun is that we also can think about ripening order. Here's another piece of the puzzle. Sometimes a very early flowering variety, such as the Alchemine that I selected, now we've got something, this one ripens in the mid-season rather than ripening with the Centennial. So just because it's an early flowering does not mean it's an early ripening. You do have to look at it, your variety choices from both those points of view. And where I want to go here. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of move forward a little bit. When we're talking about apples, I indicated that they are extremely variable. I need to move this other one. Is this tool thing visible for all of you? I don't know if it is or not. Okay, thank you. So I've got this chart here that shows, here we've got the mini dwarf. I'm sorry, I keep losing the cursor. I want to use the cursor to point at things, and then it runs away. So the mini dwarf here, we've indicated that they grow to maybe 5 to 7 feet. That's actually managed size. and that's true for the rest of these as you go along. These are managed sizes of these different designations of the tree size. But so let's talk real quick about what dwarf, for instance, means. There is an actual definition of what dwarf means. Dwarf means that the variety on that dwarfing rootstock will grow to 50% of its potential size relative to if it was on its own roots. So if I'm looking at, for instance, a Gravenstein tree that on its own roots will produce a tree that's probably going to be in the 50 to 60 foot range, then that Gravenstein grafted onto a dwarfing rootstock, like an M26 rootstock, if not kept pruned, can grow to 25 to 30 feet, like the one out in my yard. A mini dwarf will grow to about 25% of the standard size, or it's 75% dwarfing. A semi-dwarf will grow to, I'll have to do my math here, 60 to 75% of the standard size, or 25 to 40% dwarfing. And then we've got this columnar category. What's happening with those trees is not a function of the rootstock, other than that there is some size control. Again, apples are extremely variable, and there are many different forms of apples. There are varieties of apples that are prostrate, just grow straight on the ground. And there are the ones that tend to grow in that nice rounded habit that we're used to seeing. And then there are these columnars. And this is just a normal, natural genetic variant that occurs in apples, that we have this columnar type of growth habit, which means that the side branches will, I don't know if you can see my hand very well, the side branches will come out at a bit of an angle, and they'll go out for a short distance, a foot, 2 feet maybe, sometimes 3. And then they turn and grow straight up. And over the years, they may produce more side branches that go out. Eventually, it looks kind of like a candelabra. Or you can control those branches as they start to extend, cut them back to a fruit bud at the base, and you will have an upright stem with a lot of fruit spurs all around it, and the whole thing will stay very narrow in habit. So this is my image of representing vigor in the apple varieties. We can have variance in shape from the genetic diversity in apples. We can also have variance in vigor. So if we look at the little figure on the left here, these are our least vigorous varieties: Akane, Centennial, red flesh crabapple. And then as we move along to the right, we'll see that we get more vigorous. And looking at the most vigorous here, we've got Gravenstein, Chehalis. On their own roots, they grow very strong. And then if we come down and we look at the different kinds of rootstocks that we've put underneath here, from mini dwarf to semi-dwarf to standard, these numbers then are indicating the minimum distance you can plant these at between trees. So this is your spacing between trees. On an M27 rootstock, that spacing varies from 4 to 8 feet, depending on the variety that we're putting on top. That's a really important thing to understand. The size of the tree is a function of both the rootstock and the variety. It isn't just one or the other. Are there any questions coming in right now, Alice? Okay. I'm accustomed to having a lot of questions, so type your questions in if you feel the need. And then I thought we'd just take a quick look. Here's another pollination chart looking at pear. European pears, which are different from Asian pears, not only in terms of ripening season, but also in terms of bloom season. Asian pears do bloom before the European pears do. So there's very little overlap. Sometimes the very latest of the blooming Asian pears will cross with the very earliest of the Europeans, like a Bartlett is one of the earliest. If you are interested in something like Shapova, which is a natural cross between European pear and European ash or mountain ash, wonderful fruit. It's quite interesting. It blooms pretty late, and my observation has been that Bosque and Commis have the nearest bloom times to the Shapova. The rest of those in the late season would not bloom near enough to function as a pollinizer. Okay, so now we're going to get to some really good stuff here. And because of my challenge getting set up, I'm going to be a little bit fumbly right here. Let me just see, what did I put next here? All right. So Alice, if you would go ahead and switch me to full screen, or do you want me to just?
No, you're good. Now everybody go up to the upper right-hand corners and click on view and go to speaker view. So Theresa will be big on your screen because she's going to show you some things.
And do I do that also, Alice?
You can. It'll help you see what you're doing.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just waiting for it to react here. Okay, so right now, Alice, I can see you really well.
Okay, the upper right hand. Oh, I'm talking. That's why. I'm going to mute
okay. Okay. And then it'll switch to me. I'll wait on that. Let's see if that happens. All right. So, I went through the cold storage building and I picked out some trees to bring home and share with you folks.
Hey, Theresa, turn your camera over just a little bit toward the hallway. Yeah, that'll work.
Thank you. And do I need to tip backwards at all? Remember, I can.
No, that's good.
Oh, okay. Bring it back down a little bit. All right.
Yep.
Are we good? Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to hold up two trees here. I really am. Here we go. And this is where I'm going to ask for some feedback from you folks. So here I've got two trees. Let me just get them out of their bags if I can. And I want you to indicate to me which of these trees you would rather put in your yard. So
hold them real still because there's a lag.
Yeah, okay. So can we see the roots right now? Okay, good. And now I'm going to your hand signals aren't working for me, Alice.
We can't see the roots. Lift them up a little higher.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Here we go. I'm running into, I've got an overhead. I've got my own roof. Can we see them now? Yes. Okay, good. Kind of get a feel for that. And now I'm going to slowly lower them. And you can see them in my hands kind of side by side as I bring them down. And now this is my right hand over here. And I would like some feedback. Do we think the one in my right hand or my left hand would make a much better tree to put in the yard?
I have a bunch of lefts.
You have
Okay.
five lefts and nobody right. I guess we've just biased that sample.
All righty. So now I'm going to tell you why that's actually not the correct answer. Yes, this tree in my right hand is smaller. Both of these trees will be the same size 2 to 3 years after planting. And the reason for that is the one in my left hand has gone through significantly more root damage when it was harvested and is going to need a year to just sit there and think about whether it should start growing or not. And Alice, I'll tell you, I'm not able to see me in the center of the screen still. So I'm just keep giving me feedback. I can agree that the top on this left tree looks absolutely fantastic, so full of branches, and it's really super crowded and dense. And then the other thing I didn't tell you is that these are peach trees, and peach trees cannot have scaffold limbs so close together. If they are left that close together, they will actually end up splitting the tree out when they set their really heavy crops of fruit. So although this one in my left hand looks like a really terrific, I would take the one in my right hand. And I know the top really is not looking like much at all, but in reality, these lower limbs here are not positioned in a good place for retaining. They're really very close to the ground. And then my next limbs here, well, I've got to broke them into. These trees were not number one trees. I will confess that. Let's hang on a sec here. So if I was going to continue to work with this tree, I would do something like I would remove this really strong limb altogether because it's trying to take over the top of the tree. I'm going to take the small one out as well. This strong limb here is trying to dominate. It may be in a pretty good location. This small one next to it, which is broken anyway, is too close together in terms of the height on the trunk. We want actually 3 to 4, even 6 inches between scaffold limbs on a peach tree. And so I would have to remove a lot of limbs from here just to open it up enough. But I could do that. There's not as many limbs on here as there was on the other one. There's a lot less work to get this tree in a good shape for getting started to become a strong tree in my landscape. So now I'm going to show you a tree. And how many thumbs up do we have on this particular tree? That, yay, that looks like a great tree to put in the landscape.
Thumbs up or tell me yes in the chat, please.
They want to know what the roots look like.
Okay. And that was an excellent question to ask about the roots. That's a very important question to ask.
If you could push the roots a little bit off to the side, because with you as the background, it's hard to see them. Whereas if you put it there.
Are you saying that they blend in with my shirt?
Yes.
Up a little bit, Theresa. Just a little bit up.
The roots?
Oh, better. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I may get the hang of this thing. We got a lovely straight trunk. It's not perfect, but it's nice and straight. I really like that in a tree, to have a nice straight trunk. I like to have good root system. And after that, I really don't care. Because I have a pruner and I can shape the top however I want. It's actually really typical for cherry trees, this is a cherry tree, to be a whip or be very lightly branched. And that's to your advantage because now you can shape this tree in your landscape where it's open and not crowded, growing 1 foot apart with its neighbor, and help develop a really strong shaped tree. I would probably choose to take this limb off right here. Just don't need it. Now I have a clean slate. And once this tree is in the ground, I can decide at what height I want my scaffolding limbs to originate and simply cut one bud above that location. Now that's power, that's control. Now this tree is going to shape the way I want it to. Those scaffold limbs are going to originate at the height that I've chosen. I like that. All right, last big tree. And I'm going to start with the roots. We all see the roots all right?
Doesn't look like many roots.
It doesn't look like very many roots, but we've got some strong roots here that are going to dig in and grow well. I don't have as much caliper on this tree as I did on something like a stone fruit tree, like the peaches that we just had. This is actually a very nice apple. Again, I took everything that I brought here today out of our seconds. There was probably some damage on this tree somewhere, so that it wasn't going to get put into our inventory. But again, I had that straight trunk. The root system might be a little bit on the weak side, but I do have a good storage root going on, so there's plenty of reserve energy available, and there will be a lot of new root productions going to occur from these strong roots. This tree will settle in, and we're not overly vigorous in the top. The one problem that we have with this tree is that we have two tops, and we have a narrow crotch angle. Can we see how my finger cannot go all the way down into the crotch angle? This is important because in the someday, as this tree, as these limbs grow, this point of attachment never changes. This angle never changes. And as each of these thickens, we have bark to bark in terms of your contact rather than wood to wood. Bark to bark contact is not secure. So ultimately this limb, which is all bark to bark contact up here as it thickens and only wood down here, when there is a fruit load up here and it weighs out, it's going to rip out of the tree and make a big hole in the trunk. So this is the kind of thing that we would clean up out of a tree just from the get-go. Oops. I've been doing some repotting and cutting potting mix with my pruners. They're not in very good shape today. So now that's not such a bad looking tree. This layer of scaffolds is a little bit low. Once this tree is planted, it's about 2.5 feet. You can keep a layer at that height, but most people don't want to keep a layer at that height, so these are going to be your sacrifice limbs. These two here are pretty strong and tending to compete with the upper portion of the tree as well. We don't need anything from down here, so let's just eliminate them. Now we've got something that looks a little bit more open and layered. We've got the lighter branches that's going to be a little bit better balanced relative to that little bit smaller root system. This just turned into a very fine tree to put into the ground. Straight trunk, good roots, the rest of it we fixed. So I'm not going to do a full pruning class here because that would take too much time. But we don't always buy bare root plants. Well, actually, here I've got some more bare roots. Reach into my bag of tricks here, and again, I'll get my green shirt out of the way. Raspberries. I I can't say that I like this one particularly well. I like this one. I like raspberry. The raspberries grow from the root system. The stem is irrelevant. That's why we've cut it back. The new growth comes from the root system. That's the perennial part of the plant. And we can do like this and plunk it in the ground, and we'll have new shoots coming up from all along the length of those roots. Another thing we sell as a bare root is strawberries. Okay, they shared with me a bag of leftovers, and I can tell these have been sitting warm, and these are the smalls, quite a bit smaller. Normally the plants that we're offering are, the roots are about this long. I stand like this, the roots are about this long, and they're fully dormant. But this is all you get with a strawberry plant. It's balanced, and this will actually grow just fine. Now I'm going to talk about pottage real quick. Here. Okay, so here I've got a fig plant. And how do we know that this is a good plant? How do you know that I'm providing you with a good plant? How do I know? How do I look at these without taking them out of the pot, every single one of them, to say that this is a good plant that I can sell to you? Over the years, I've actually done that. I've taken a lot of plants out of their pots and looked at the roots and compared that to the amount of growth that I see above. And if this is a 3-foot stake, that's just been my reference point over the years. If I have a plant like a fig, something that I want to have with a single leader, if it has grown to at least 3/4 of this stake, if I have a caliper of at least 1/4 inch, then I know I've also got good roots in the pot. The top growth can't happen unless the roots are growing. That's just the equation. That's how it works. No root movement, no top. I got the top. I know the roots did their thing. I have in my collection here we go. So there's a fig that did not make the grade. And hopefully you can see the difference that small one, and I know that this one just did not fill its pot with roots properly. Another fun plant, the aronia. And here I want something that's more of a multi-stemmed, but sometimes they just get going and make these really strong leaders. And here is the one that did not make the grade. And you can see that the amount of new growth it put on last year was very minimal. It was mostly just this little squeaky right here, a couple little things down here. That is not enough growth to suggest that the roots were really moving and in the pots. And my goal is to make sure that you have strong roots. If you have strong roots, then the rest of the process happens. What if it's a vine? I'm going to, with something that's a fruiting vine, this is a kiwi, something that's a fruiting vine, I'm again looking for the growth to have gone to the top of the stake, the 3-foot stake, or very near it. And I manage these so that we have just 1 or 2 leaders. So we are focusing that energy and going up and moving strong roots. It's just that the equation just works. Here I've got a honeyberry plant. Well, I don't have all the height that you saw on the other plants. Is this one a weaker plant then? It's not, because I agree with you, Alice. It's not, because I have multiple stems. And if I was to add that extension up, then I did get that strong growth. It divided into multiple points. We try to manage the plants so that depending on how it's to be grown once it goes in the landscape, if it's going to be a more shrubby thing, we try to make sure that we're giving you something that's more shrubby looking. I'm coming back. I'm not running away. I just didn't get everything quite together. All right, so here, like raspberry, here I've got blackberry plants. Again, I want to make sure that we've got good, strong roots, and so I've looked at the tops. This has been cut off at this point. We always cut the stem short because of the way we ship. The most important thing is that I have strong roots in here. New growth is going to come from the crown area. And so I'm not worried about leaving lots of stem on it. I want that crown area growth. That's what's going to give you that strong new plant. And obviously this one is just much weaker. So look at that kind of quality when you're looking at the plants, or when you receive them. Look at that kind of quality, and that will help you to know whether you've received a good. Because I know everybody's getting things shipped to them, these days. That will help you to know whether you've received a good quality plant. What else did I have here? I think that's it on my show and tell as far as what a good quality plant looks like. The next step is to think about getting these things into the ground. And if I bring back one of my trees, I'm going to come back to that cherry tree. When I look at the root system, I'll get out of the way. When I look at the root system.
Lift it up a little bit, Theresa, so we can see that. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So when I look at the root system, I've got broken places. I've got curling around roots. I've got a root going way wonky in one direction. And I prefer to clean this sort of stuff up. Where did I? So we're going to clean the root system up. We'll have soaked it for a while to make sure that the roots are nicely hydrated before we put it in a planting hole. And then we're going to go through and we're going to cut away everything that's broken. And here's the thing. Root systems will respond to the pruning in the same way that the upper portion of the tree does. If I make a heading cut on the root, in other words, I've left a portion of root behind where I make the cut, I know I'm going to get branching from that remaining portion of root. And eliminating curling means that I'm eliminating wrapping around in the planting hole. We want the root system on these trees to extend outwards and start exploring the area under the lawn or wherever it is next to it, and looking for nutrients. We don't want those roots to stay in the planting hole and get all confused in circles. So we're going to just clean the roots up a bit. And there's lots of little tiny roots. And if I leave those, I'm going to have to kind of help guide them out. I don't want to put them in the planting hole and squish them up. Because once I do that, I've just forced them to only grow in that one direction. And if I reduce them, I've left ends where new root growth extension can occur. So my planting hole may or may not accommodate this wonky length here. my typical planting hole is going to be dug to the depth that the root system requires. That's from the bottom of the root system to a point that is at minimum 2 inches below the graft union. Here's the graft union. Here's the bottom edge of the graft union. I don't want to bury this tree any deeper than 2 inches from that graft union. I don't mind taking it down a little bit more because I may do some mulching. And the reason we're doing this, if the variety is sufficiently covered, it may very well initiate roots. And if it does that, you will have a tree that is now on its own root system, and you will lose the size management that you're getting from the root system that it was grafted to. So my planting depth is going to be at minimum 2 inches. I might even take it down a little bit further. If I had some water, if you get the trunk wet, you can usually see a color change in the bark that will tell you what the planting depth was in the field. Right now, this is pretty dirty because it's gone through a lot of processes. So you would put water on there, and chances are we're talking about a point right about in here was the actual planting depth. And that's a fine depth to return it to. So we dug a hole that was deep enough to accommodate the root system, and then perhaps about 3 foot wide, so that we know we can fit the entire root down in. We're not digging it any deeper than the depth required to get this tree into the ground. The reason for that is that if you loosen and fluff the soil underneath the tree, over time, as the earth vibrates and shifts and water moves through, that loose fluff disappears. It sinks, it settles, and so does your tree. And then pretty soon your graft union is covered and you've lost the advantages of that root system. With something like a cherry tree, you may also end up with disease in the graft union because they are susceptible to picking up some of the soil-borne diseases. Now I'm getting just, I think, a little bit off my track here. All right, so I'm going to go back to the hole preparation. So we dig the hole to the depth required to accommodate the root system, take it out about 3 foot wide. We've excavated that soil onto, say, a piece of cardboard, and now we're looking at this hole. And Alice, you mentioned that a lot of folks are dealing with clay soil. So now we're looking at this hole with this, yucky clay soil down in there. Let's go ahead and just dump in a whole bunch of really nice, I'm going to import some topsoil and fill it all up with really nice stuff. I hear that a lot. And I'll tell you why you shouldn't do that. Number one, you are putting a different soil structure into that planting hole, which means a different soil porosity. Water does not move readily from one soil porosity size to another, whether it goes from large to small, small to large. I've tested this with sponges. Water does not move readily from one to the other. So you may create a situation where within the planting hole, it holds too much water and drowns the roots. Another thing that happens is you've created this wonderful paradise for those roots. It's full of nutrients and it feels so good. And every time they get to the edge of the planting hole and they bump into that really inhospitable situation compared to that fine stuff you put it in the planting hole, the roots turn and they just circle and stay in the planting hole. And for several years, that tree grows very happily until all of a sudden the roots have nowhere to go because they have filled up the space. And when the roots are not moving, the top of the tree is not moving. Growth is going to slow way down. The tree starts being stressed. maybe a good windstorm comes along, the whole thing tips over, and you see a root system the size and shape of the original planting hole. So let's go ahead and encourage the trees to make use of the planting hole, the native soil that's available to them. We'll do that by going back to the pile that we dug out, and we're going to mix up to 20% organic matter, compost, leaf mold, peat moss, coconut coir, any of those sorts of things. 20% with that pile. That's about 2 shovels full. With the pile that you excavated from a 12 to 15 inch deep hole, 3 foot wide, 2 shovels full of compost or amendment. Probably would be a good idea to add lime. We get enough rainfall in our region that soils tend to be on the acidic side. And remember, these trees mostly want a 6.3 to 6.8 pH. So a cup of lime mixed in would be a good thing. A cup of bone meal or other phosphorus source for a slow release phosphorus to support the rapid new root growth that needs to be occurring. And plant roots utilize a lot of phosphorus as they're growing. So just to support that initial burst of growth, we'll add a little bit of phosphorus. We can maybe add a little bit of green sand for some of the micronutrients. The only other amendment that we really consider having in the planting hole is fungal organisms. So all these other things, we're going to mix it with the backfill. And now we've got the backfill ready for the tree to go into the planting hole. If the tree root system is rather flat in profile, like this one, then we don't need to build a cone to put the roots on. This one will set down on that flat just fine. If we happen to have a root system that has that more of a cone shape, then yes, we would want to build a cone to accommodate that shape. Now we're still thinking about, we've got clay soil. We want to ensure that we've got good drainage out of the planting hole. So we might get our digging fork out and poke in and rock back to crack the bottom of the planting hole and maybe around the sides a bit. We are not lifting and turning and fluffing. All we do is poke in, rock back, just crack the soil, fracture it. That's all we want to do. That will be enough. Now the tree goes in, and again, if we're planting in that clay soil, we're going to put half of our backfill in, and we've made sure, as we get started, we've made sure that we've looked across the plane of where we're planting so that we've got that graft union at least 2 inches above what the finished plane will be. It's kind of hard to tell when you've got that broad planting hole. Lay a stick across there or something to help you know for sure. And make sure you've got that tree up. Even go up just a little bit more than 2 inches just to be on the safe side. So we're going to put half the backfill in, get the hose out or the bucket, and fill the planting hole with water. Jiggle the tree just a little bit to encourage big air bubbles to release and allow the soil to settle in. Let that drain out. Finish putting the backfill in. Flood it again. Jiggle it again. At this point, that clay soil that's saturated is heavy enough that the tree is going to sit rather securely. Sometimes I might use my fingers to firm in just right around the crown. Never use your foot. Those clay particles that are just flat platelets, and you put your foot on them, they're just going to squish together, and you're going to eliminate the smaller air pockets that are of value inside that planting hole. So never use your foot, but that water should have settled things in very nicely. Just backstep real quick, as we were filling the planting hole, I mentioned the fungal organisms, and I'm referring to mycorrhizal fungal organisms. That's just the term that's been coined for these. These are organisms that live in association with the root systems of the trees. Natural associations. If you go to a native apple forest in Russia, which is where apples originated, you're going to find down in the soil certain organisms that are associated with the tree root systems. And those organisms facilitate uptake of water and nutrients, in particular phosphorus, but also other nutrients. The good news is that it's understood how to reproduce these organisms, and we can inoculate our trees. The bad news is commercial production systems don't inoculate the trees. You will need to. If you are planting into a lawn situation, if you are planting into almost any situation other than there was a stand of Himalayan blackberries that had been there for years and you cleaned it out, but you left all of that wonderful duff in place, that will be full of the organisms. Other than that planting situation, you need to inoculate the trees. And the product we're selling at Raintree looks like a little tea bag. Let me just get one out here. Here we go. It just looks like a little tea bag. Can you see that? And this would be placed in contact with the roots, 3 to 5 per tree, as you're backfilling the planting hole. This is what we sell. There are other resources for mycorrhizal fungi. You want a good, strong mixture of ecto-organisms, ecto meaning that they colonize the outer portion of the root system. Once these roots are inoculated, the mushrooms, the fungal organisms continue to extend and grow with the root system of the tree. So you only apply them once. And after that, you've got strong, healthy root systems that support strong, healthy trees. So in a clay soil, we're not done when we finish with the backfill. My next step is to get my digging fork out again. And this time I'm starting at, here's my planting hole right here. And I'm starting here. And I'm going to poke in and rock back to crack the soil, starting at the edge of the planting hole. I'm going to go all the way around the planting hole and then 2 more times, so that now I've got an area probably 5 feet across that has been either dug or fractured and loosened. Never lifting and turning, just fracturing. And then I put a mulch on the surface. I have found that in my own just trials in my yard, experimenting with different products as a mulch, I have found oat straw to be extremely valuable in improving the structure of the soil beneath it when I'm working with our native clay soils. The humates that come from it, the process from the oat straw degrading, takes those clay particles that are all flat together and forms them into aggregate clumps. These clumps next to each other will provide air pores. Air and water move up and down through the soil profile properly. Worms move up and down through the soil profile properly, moving nutrients up and down and supporting the overall health of your tree. I like a half a bale of straw per tree, and I don't fluff the flakes. I simply lay them down and let them decompose. I don't have a pretty landscape. It would be nice, but I don't. So I don't put in landscape fabrics or anything like that. I actually don't like landscape fabrics for the first couple of years at least. I want that root system to be established out beyond before I consider putting landscape fabric just immediately under the tree. It's just better for the overall health of the tree. Okay, and then ultimately, we recommend, although your tree comes with a plastic label and whoever you purchase it from comes with a label that will probably last for several years, but only for several years. We recommend that you come up with some sort of a permanent way to identify the tree. There are aluminum tags that you can possibly use, make wood tags, and also make a map. If you're using something like the metal or aluminum tags, raccoons and pack rats really like those and will take them off your trees and haul them away. So make a map, because I can guarantee you 10 or 12 years later, you're not going to quite remember exactly what it was you planted in that spot. When I did finally make my own map, I really had to think hard about what I had put where. So I strongly encourage you to do that. Training, you'll want to do a little bit of shaping on your fruit trees, similar to what I did on that apple tree, just to get it started. There are some good videos out and training systems. There's the pruning and the training and pruning publication through Extension Office is pretty good. Yeah, I like that one. And those will give you the steps for getting started. There's been a lot of research was done over the last 15, 20 years about the proper way to train these trees. A little bit different from some of the older ideas, and actually makes your job a little bit easier. I should go back and talk just, Alice, how am I doing on time? I'm okay for the moment?
Well, for the moment, but we'll probably have to tie it up in 5 minutes. It's getting kind of late.
Yeah, this is about the point where I'm like, okay, what else should I cover? And I should be leaving opportunity for a question or two. If I go back to the strawberries, it's very important when you plant strawberries. Boy, this one doesn't even have a crown, but it's got good roots, so we'll just pretend. It's very important when you plant strawberries that the roots be straight. Any root that is bent when you put it in the ground is going to die. So we want those roots to be straight when they go into the ground. And I have seen instructions that says make a hole, make a really pretty mound and spread the roots out over the mound. And honestly, nobody should ever have to work that hard. So another approach, I was taught this many years ago when I worked at the Puyallup Research Station, WSU Puyallup Research Station, working for somebody who was studying strawberries. And if you place the crown at the base of your palm and look at the length of your fingers, you're going to trim the roots so that they're a little bit shorter than your hand. Like this, pretty much like this. You've got loose soil. Hopefully you've done a nice rototilling job or used your digging fork or whatever to loosen it up to about probably about a 10 to 12 inch depth. Do not over fertilize. Do not put much fertilizer at all when you're planting strawberries. Manures, no. Compost, yes. They really like compost. And strawberries are extremely responsive to the fungal organisms. You can grow them in sawdust old sawdust if you just give them those fungal organisms. They'll do just fine. So you've got your loose soil. You take your trowel and you pull the soil back. You wrap your fingers around the roots. You put your hand down into the hole you just created. You open your fingers, pull your hand up, pull the crown up just a little bit to ensure that you haven't left anything bent at the bottom, and firm it in place. And go on to the next. This is quick. This is easy. One of my coworkers is producing strawberries, and he plants a lot of strawberries every year. He told me his technique, and honestly, I think it would work just fine. He's putting out ground cover cloth, and then he's making a slit where he's planting the strawberry, and he literally just shoves it down in like this. He's just dropping it down in like this. So yes, all of these roots are going to die. And from the crown, a lot of new roots will come along and the plant will go on and grow fine. So there's a couple of ideas. The one I don't like is where you make the pretty mound and spread the roots out all over it all pretty. It doesn't help. It's just a lot of work. Raspberries. Raspberries, add the cow manure. Cow manure, raspberries want bacteria in the soil. Their roots interact better with bacteria in the soil than fungal organisms. Add the cow manure. That's how you get the bacteria in the soil. Work that in to a nice depth. Take your raspberry, where did it go? Make a trench. You can make a mound up about, I don't know, 12, 15 inches, 12 inches high is probably fine. So make a mound and make a trench down the center of that mound. Take your raspberry plant, because raspberries do need really good drainage. They're really susceptible to soil diseases. And just push this down in. Now these particular plants here, you just read the plant so you know how deep to put it. I can see roots at here, here, and here on this piece of raspberry plant. So that's how deep it needs to go down into the ground. Just to the stem, which is the marker that shows you where you put your raspberry plant. And then over the course of the spring, new shoots will come up from the root portions. So I should probably wrap up, allow time for a couple of questions. Thank you so very much for letting me practice, I guess, with you folks and share a little bit of what's stuck in my head with all of you.
I have a couple of questions, and then I think we should open up the mic and give people about 5 minutes. I have a question for her. My mother-in-law has an apple tree in her yard, and we don't know what varieties of apples it produces. Is there a way to identify a particular apple?
Boy, I wish there was. So there are a couple of organizations that will give it a really good try. One of them is the, what's the Fruit Society down in Portland?
They're closed.
Are they really? Oh my goodness, so now there's nobody left. Sometimes at the Seattle Tree Fruit Society, when they have their fall events, they'll make an effort. There are books that can be used that you cut the apple this way and you cut the apple that way, and you look at what you see inside, and you look at a stem, and you look at the fruit stem, and you look at the calyx, and you look at the leaf, and then you look at historically what has been popular in that particular region, and then you may possibly be able to come close. I know Oregon State University had been offering an option for DNA testing of apple fruit. It will cost something, and I'm not sure what, under the current circumstances, and I'm not sure how available they are for doing that. But other than DNA testing, there really isn't anything. But that question often arises with, this is an old tree, I don't know what it is, but I want more. And the way you get more is you have a new tree grafted. And that is one of the services that we are offering at Raintree. If you go to our website, look up custom grafting, and you'll find out how to do that. I'm going to start the grafting soon. We're almost out of time for setting up new appointments, but we can set up a few more. We can set up a few more custom grafts. So that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had the same problem when people bring them into the plant and insect clinic. We've contacted the Apple Society, and they say, I don't know.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I have actually watched the Apple Society folks with a person brought in an apple, and then they walked away, and then they came back 2 hours later with the same apple, maybe to a different person at the table, and got two different answers.
Right.
It is very difficult, very difficult.
Yeah. Okay, one more question that they wrote. And it's, why do nurseries in our area sell plants that don't do well here? Good question, huh?
Oh, and I should have addressed that at the very beginning. All right, so here's the answer. Economics. The Pacific Northwest represents actually a very small portion of the customer base, I guess you would say, the customer base nationwide of people who want to grow fruit trees. Our environment is so unique that a lot of those varieties just won't perform well in our location. Most of the rest of the country, they work fine. So those nurseries are producing to the largest customer base, and it's just economics. Raintree took a different approach, saying, let's find out what performs well in the Pacific Northwest. We do still offer varieties that won't perform well, but we try to offer a lot that do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
May I add on to that quickly?
Yes.
Yeah, because that question was from me. When my husband and I moved here from California a few years ago, we were so excited about planting fruit trees, and we went to our local nursery and bought 2 pear trees, a cherry tree, and an apricot tree. Well, the apricot tree is not doing well at all. In fact, it's probably going to be pulled out. We just pulled the cherry tree out today. And I was told when I asked a question at the same nursery, well, apricots don't do well here. They do well in Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington.
Right.
And I'm like, why? It just was frustrating that we put so much time and effort and money into these and they didn't do well.
Absolutely, and it's all about education. That's why I want you to have that better understanding of your microclimate and understand its limitations. Apricots don't do well because they evolved in a mountain environment. They have a fairly short chill hour requirement. They are designed to wake up because spring just happened. We've got to go. Summer's short. Fall and winter are coming. Got to get this job done. And here in the Pacific Northwest, we've got this whole lazy thing going on between winter and spring. So that apricot wakes up too soon and is impacted by fungal diseases. We do offer at Raintree a couple of later blooming varieties, which does help hedge the bet. And then I have talked with folks. There's a couple things you can do. Plant your apricot on the north side of something that will keep it in the winter shadow, so it stays dormant absolutely as long as possible. It needs to be probably like from a house, a single-story house, maybe 20 feet or so away, so that during the summer, when that sun swings north, and we've got that good solar input, it's getting what it needs to fruit and flower and ripen the fruit and so forth. But in the winter time, stuck in that shadow, it's more likely to stay asleep. You can also accomplish that by partially draping over the top, have a structure and partially drape with white plastic to reflect heat and keep it cool. Otherwise, yes, I agree. And I have actually even been in nurseries and said a thing or two when I saw, inappropriate varieties being offered or whatever. But understand that those nurseries are buying from a source that produces for nationwide.
Thank you.
Hi there, who have we got?
Other questions?
Okay.
Please speak up.
Hi, this is Nancy, and I'm the one that asked about the apple tree and identifying the type of apple that was growing in my mother-in-law's yard. Well, here, I'll turn on video, that way you can also see my lips.
That's okay.
So she also has another apple tree in her yard. It's a king apple tree. So we know what that is. So I'm wondering, Okay, since it wouldn't be since the king apple tree would not be self-pollinating, would that mean that the unknown apple tree would be something that would be able to pollinate the king apple tree?
Do both trees produce well?
Yes.
Are there other apple trees in the neighborhood within quarter mile, half mile?
That I don't know. I was kind of wondering how far the tree would need to be in a neighbor's yard.
It depends on who the pollinizing insect is. If it's honeybees, they will travel great distances. Quarter mile, half mile is very easy for them. If it's native pollinizers like mason bees, they only travel up to 300 yards. So the trees then have to be much closer together. But if both trees are fruiting well, then I would guess that the one is the pollinizer, but there's perhaps something else around that is also providing pollination. Or does it fruit, but does it fruit heavily or fruit lightly?
Heavily.
Okay.
Happy.
They're both very happy trees.
Yeah. Okay. And when you watch them, they're blooming at the same time.
Now that I don't know, I'd have to ask my mother-in-law. Yeah.
Okay.
They've had the trees for many, many years.
Sure.
So I'm sure they know what the habits of the trees are.
Mm-hmm.
If they are blooming together, then what would that indicate?
That indicates that the pollination is happening between.
Okay. I'll find out.
All right. I was going to
Thank you.
turn this off.
A friend of mine has told me about taking apples to a society that requires 6 apples. You have to leave the apples with them, and it'll take some time until you get the results. It's not inexpensive, and I think they take them up to Hood River. I could get some information, but not tonight to be helpful.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, for the DNA testing. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Daria.
Although I do wonder what not inexpensive is.
Yeah, probably several hundred.
Oh, yeah. That might be a little pricey.
On my program.
Okay, I think it's probably getting late, and we should probably wind it up. Is that okay with everybody?
Last
Any
chance
other
questions?